Welcome everybody. Really pleased to have you here with me today and starting our journey through digital citizenship. I just want you to know I appreciate you taking the time to come from your classrooms that you had to do a lot of prep work. I totally get that as a fellow educator. So let's get started. Hi, I'm Laurie Denk. I work in a program called Vision Tech, and Vision Tech is it's the initiative at Smoky Valley High School, located in Lynchburg, Kansas, to create a bridge between technology, learning, our community, more of a school to work program, and it's been wonderful. We are located in a separate building away from the high school. So my students ride a shuttle or choose to drive because it's part of the school. We also house the Smoky Valley Virtual Charter School, easily one of the best virtual charter schools in the state of Kansas. All of us are in one spot, and we create this great work environment that our kids really enjoy. Things that you would see there, we have two levels of our classes. The first is called interactive media. I consider it to be a tech boot camp where kids really get an exposure to understanding how to understand development. I mean, really great basics of tech. They get a digital citizenship course. They learn how to run all the programs on their computer, be media literate. They learn how to communicate, for example, using their digital device, how to work from afar. They do a little bit of everything, and at the end, they create a portfolio with all their work that contains a resume. It's just a great overall beginning process. The second level is known kind of by the older kids as Vision Tech, but it's actually known as Media Tech, and it is a project-driven curriculum where students, based on what they've learned, create large projects that they gather all the resources, research those resources, create a project plan, and then take their learning in the direction they want to. We do everything from game design to coding to build projects with electronics, robotics, 3D printing, application development, film and media, animation, and more. So it's a really great project. The kids also have a YouTube channel that's hugely popular, that not only contains their content from those projects, but what I think is most important, videos of reflection that demonstrate what they've learned and how they've learned it. And those are also extremely popular products from our YouTube channel. We are very interactive on social media. So if you want to care to follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, we encourage you to do so. We really believe in our program, and it's been a very effective program for our students at Smoky Valley. So why am I giving this presentation? Well, I would say it's been probably 6-7 years ago. I started branching out, as most teachers do, looking for ways to supplement my income. And a former student who works as an L7 at Amazon said, hey, I'd love to use your tech skills. And so I, through training and exposure with him, became a contract candidate sourcing specialist, which means I learned to hunt down specific information for companies that I contract with. I've worked for Zappos and Ameriprise and Amazon. I mean, just different companies like that, where I go hunt down specifically people with certain job skills. So I'm kind of the sourcer for headhunters in the language biz. So that's what I do. So here's what I learned from that is those abilities to find really specific content. And that's what I teach my kids. So here's what my big argument. You hear all this all the time, the need for digital citizenship instruction. And I'm going to tell you that need is apparent to all of us. But most of the time we think of it in terms of keeping our students safe. And I am not going to disregard that one bit, because that's a large part of any digital citizenship curriculum. but it's the part that probably has the most media created for it, things that you can access yourself. But the areas I'm going to hit are these. So literally there was a major research project done by Stanford University in 2016, and I referenced it in some of my notes later. But basically, what happened is a group of students, primarily late middle school age students, so these are kids who are 13, 14, 15 years old. They were shown propaganda, fake news, and content, and they could not discern fact from fiction. I'm sure this is not scaring anyone. The students we teach are consumers, not well-informed, skilled users of technology. They are. They know how to text and do the things they need to communicate, but they are not savvy when it comes to understanding what is truthful and what is not. All right? We understand this? More than 80% of those middle schoolers from that study believed that sponsored content was real news. That's a large percentage. Many assume that because young people are fluent in social media, they are equally savvy about what they find there. Our work shows the opposite. Now, none of this is going to be news to us, but here's what I want you to see as the part that kind of struck me the most about this bit of information. Not that it was that large, but this. The research specialists called the work dismaying, bleak, and here's the one, wait for it, a threat to our democracy. And I want us to think about that sincerely. When I actually read that, it was a little jolt. It was like one of those aha moments in a not a very pretty way. Yes, this is a threat to our democracy. We know statistically that 2 out of 3 adults get their news information that helps them make decisions about policies, cultural issues, politics, any way, shape, or form information. 2 out of 3 of those adults get that from social media, and often that social media is corrupted, managed by bots. I mean, there's a whole lot of influence, and none of it is positive. Think about this. We are raising students to become future citizens, and without this training, we endanger our democracy. And I think all of that should ring especially true to you right now. And I guess my last point I would make here is this. In 1957, when Sputnik happened, as a country, we responded with a full-fledged response to protecting our integrity. So we added math and science requirements at the high school level, and we beefed up our public school curriculum. We literally formulated NASA. We sent people to the moon. We created ARPANET, the first basic idea for a network, which evolved into the internet as we know it today. What are we doing now? Good question. So that's why I think digital curriculum is what we have to think about. So how did we begin at Smoky Valley? Because we have a full-fledged digital citizenship curriculum. So I would encourage you to think about it this way. You have to get all of your people on board. You have to have them committed. We tend to support that which we ourselves create. So here's the process we went through. Feel free to borrow it and use that, all right? So first, we pulled all kinds of sources. We looked at digital citizenship curriculums from other schools, how that they outlined where they did 9 through 12. We just kind of gathered our content and laid it all before us. It's always good to look. We discussed what we felt were the biggest areas of need within our student population. Smoky Valley is very rural. We talked about how many kids had access to internet and devices and why that was significant. And we talked about concerns we all had. We voted on areas of focus and we discussed our goals with each. That was a powerful process. And we appointed a team to develop an implementation timeline. Yeah, That was me, kind of and a team. It was myself and the business teachers at Smoky Valley High School, so a team of three. The district hired two teachers and myself, those other folks, and we created the materials during the summer of 2019. So we knew that we had 3 days to formulate. I put together much more work prior to that, but it worked out anyway. So here are the 5 areas that Smoky Valley addressed. And I want you to know that how we present that is more detailed than this, but this is what every single kid, student at Smoky Valley gets when they go through our digital curriculum class or sections. First, we deal with safe and appropriate responsible social media use. That includes knowing what to post, not to post, and how that affects you. We consider anything social media, like YouTube's a social media. So we consider all areas from Snapchat to TikTok to YouTube, Instagram, we're all of that. Student skill in finding content, search strings, that's the part that I teach that's unique. So in other words, you can't just determine what you read as accurate, but can you find the right answers once you know that something's not correct? Writing a search string is the basis for that. We also determined that being able to determine authentic information from fake information was critical, whether it be propaganda, fake news, or just flat out lies. How do you tell that? How do you tell the truth? And we teach a process to that. Understanding that a digital imprint lasts a lifetime and will impact jobs, scholarships, etc. Since we teach so much about how to be safe, it's even more than that, since many companies will require students to engage in a social media fashion. How do you make sure that what you are engaging in is authentic, it's positive, and it reflects well on you? And lastly, documentation of sources. How do you use things legally or not? And how do you document that? So we actually have our language arts department on board with that section, and I teach that as well with the multimedia aspect involved. So I mean, those were our 5 areas. You might choose something different. We gathered stuff and content, what is important, and we went to town. Okay, so implementation. So for Smoky Valley, every student receives the digital citizenship curriculum either through our required technology requirement. So every student must take either computer applications or my course, Interactive Media, which will count as their technology requirement. And through those courses, they get content. My class is a year long, so my digital citizenship curriculum coverage is more extensive than that of computer apps, but everybody gets a core kernel of those 5 points that we developed and covered. The curriculum will be updated each year. Data is collected that will be shared with the building leadership team each year. So we do a pre and a post test that lets us see if we have growth in knowledge and content. And we practice that content throughout the rest of the year. That data, by the way, this year is being used for our KISA process. So my goal, I want to share with you what I know, because what I'm sharing with you is not necessarily common knowledge, and I think it's incredibly useful. I tell kids often that it's the most powerful gift I give them. I'm not overlooking safety, please know that. Because I think you have more access to resources on teaching kids to be safe than what I'm going to give you. So I'm going to give you what I think is the hardest stuff to find. And many people have never heard of proper searching and evaluating, so it's a gem. I encourage you to change your habits, use it, and teach your kids the same. So the first thing I talk to students about is the fact that they Google things. What we find statistically is students, all of us, tend to write questions into a search engine, which is Google, and then we just basically take anything we find from the first page. So we are leaving to chance that Google interprets what we want and brings us the most accurate materials. but that's not actually what happens. Google uses keywords to try to, from our question or whatever we wrote, to try to bring us content. It can't be a mind reader, so it brings us a generic, most popular sought after material often, which is not necessarily what we want. So I teach students how to write search strings. And search strings, that's the difference between understanding what a browser and a search engine is. I teach kids that so that they understand that a browser just displays the HTML that is brought to it, and a search engine using an algorithm like a formula brings them the content. And if you know how to manipulate what content is brought to you, you're pretty golden. So we use what are called Boolean search operators combined with punctuation, keywords like from information, and domains to gather specific content. And then we learn how to drill down that content to even narrow it more specifically. That's the power of understanding how to write a search string. So what you're saying right now, search strings, what does that look like? And how does that work? Well, this is actually just me shooting Google. I'm showing you that anyone can do the basic search string stuff, and that if you go backdoor through Google settings, you can actually do what I'm going to teach you to do using Google. But this process is not very streamlined or fluid. And I like my kids to work through what they see in their mind more than using this. So with that in mind, that is why I teach kids how to write search strings. It makes them think like a researcher, and it gives them total control over their content. So here's what a search string would look like, because it's a combination of commands, keywords, to direct a search engine with specific content. And here's what one might look like. Site:/nytimes.com, and that's the domain of the New York Times. Technology integration in quotes, or technology innovation within parentheses, and Apple 2009 to 2015. That search string is looking specifically for New York Times articles that include the ideas of technology integration or one or the other, technology innovation, and I'm requiring it to be from a specific time. That 2009 through 2015 means I only want New York Times articles from those dates. That's specific. The content I get from writing that actually breaks the algorithm that within the search engine and makes it bring me exactly what I want. That's what I want to teach you how to do today. It's a pretty powerful thing. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is that you have to understand what are called Boolean operators. And I bet maybe a librarian, if we have librarians here today, know these tools very well. But just so you understand what they do, we're going to actually use Boolean text operators, the words and, or, not, or a negative sign within Chrome, and they must be in all caps to be used as Boolean operators within a search string. We're actually writing code in a way, so they must be in all caps. So when you use and actually narrows your search, because you're saying I must have two things before you bring me this content. So it narrows your search. It adds requirements. So if, for example, I say survivors and witnesses, I'm looking for people that are still alive or who lived through something, as well as were a part of that visual narrative. So do you see how that narrows my content? Now, other Boolean operators would be or, capital O-R. That's going to expand my content, because I'm going to say, give me this or this, creating both of those contents. So if I ask for memoir or narrative, I'm going to get content keyword searches that pull both of those contents. Lastly, using not or a negative means that I'm going to remove or omit content from a search. And if I'm using this search in Chrome, I put the negative sign in front of a word. And since we all tend to be kind of Chrome users, awesome. But if you are using Safari, Firefox, Opera, etc., you can use the word not in all caps. And again, that excludes. So if I were looking for an autobiography but did not want biographies, I could write a search string that had the keyword autobiography without and exclude biographies. Punctuation. So I'm going to show you some of the punctuation. Parentheses are used to group keywords together. Think of them just in terms of mathematical equations, how we use parentheses to create order, sequence. Parentheses can group content together and help us see things differently. So if I had, for example, a search string that said cite, the name of a domain, and I asked for survivor or witnesses, notice how that would be different than if I said witness or survivor and Holocaust, because survivor and Holocaust narrow content with witness, while the other one expands it. And if you look carefully, you kind of see how that works. It changes the direction of a search, and it's very handy. Quotation marks bring us specific content. Anything you put in quotation marks means I want to look for this exact phrase in any search. That narrows content. A truncate sign, which is the sign right above the number 8 on your keyboard, and an ellipse, a dot, dot, dot. A truncate sign allows us to find blanks. So think of it as a blank. I have blank to go before I sleep. If I wrote that phrase and I put it in a search engine, it would tell me what that word is that I'm missing. Notice this one. The next one I have is for an email pattern. I have quotation, truncate at smokyvalley.org, quotation marks, and email as a search string. I could actually trace patterns of emails that way. I can find people how email patterns work. One of the things I do. An ellipse, the dot, 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 as we know that, ellipse for us. That allows us to create range of information. So, for example, from that former search string from January of 2019 to August of 2019, that allows me to find content between that range. If I'm searching for the cost of something, I want to buy a Canon DSLR and I want a package or a bundle, and I would like that package or bundle to be between $800 and $900. That allows me to narrow my content. You're thinking automatically right now, my shoppers, I can hear your wheels are turning. It is a helpful tool. Site domain allows you to X-ray a site. X-ray a site means I want to look for content within a specific website or root search, right? So if I have a search engine that says site and it's got a domain with it, and then it says survivor or witness, I'm looking for the content survivor or witness within that site. And my research, my information will be specifically designed for that. Site, instructables.com, beginning Arduino and or project or build. What's cool about that is my students will use search strings like that to find content for projects. So if they are going to create a project and need resources to teach them, because we don't have books with my program, they might write a search string like that to find instructional projects and information to help them learn content as they are designing their project. And that's how you would X-ray a site. Link domain allows you to view sites linked to another site's domain. So, for example, if I want to find out who is linked to our Smoky Valley domain, I can do that. You say, why would that be important? Well, sometimes I can track down the validity of a website. So let's say I find a website and I'm like going, is this really authentic? Is this information genuine? Track and trace who's linked to it. You'll get a pretty quick idea of how reliable that source is based on who is linking to it. File type extension. Oh, wow, folks, this is a great tool. So if, for example, I need to find the driver's manual from the Kansas State Department of Transportation, and I don't have a lot of time, I would write file type : PDF and state of Kansas and driver and manual, and boom, the first pull back is going to be that PDF of the driver's manual, and right there it is. It will help you locate so much information. In URL keyword or in title keyword. So if I want to find the word Viking, for example, within websites, I could do that. In this case, if I use the word Holocaust survivor or Holocaust or entitled Holocaust survivor, any website that is titled that or has it within the URL will be brought to me. Now, I will tell you that I don't use this a ton of times, but boy, it can be helpful, especially when you're expanding a search. So those are all the commands. Consider them like the rules of the game. So I'm going to teach you what I teach my kids. And this has to be a process you teach your kids as well. So first thing I do is teaching them to write a search string is, of course, I teach them the basics. And I tell them any good search string is about formulating information in your head because you are the one that writes the search string. You have to be the one that thinks about what you want to know. So the first thing is, what do I want to know? What do I want to find out? That's the first thing you got to figure out. What do I need to find out based on what I know? So if I have information, that helps me write a search string. And knowing what I want to find helps me write a search string. Lastly, how do I take those first two questions and put it into a physical written string that gathers me content? So I will ask that question all the time. What do you know? What do you need to find out? How do we write it? And we practice that in class. I will give them problems. I will let them often talk about, we will share out loud in class. What do we know? What do we got to find out? How do we write it? And then I'll have them do it on their own. It's great practice. So first, write a search string to find primary sources from Holocaust survivors. Let's say this was my problem. I want you to find resources, but I want those resources to be primary, meaning directly from the people's mouths who were involved in that were Holocaust survivors. So how do I do that? First, what do I know? Well, I know that I'm going to be looking for Holocaust and survivors. But it's more than that. It's what are other words for primary sources? Now, I can use primary sources, but not all primary sources are going to be labeled primary sources. So I have to know what would be keywords that would lead us to understanding testimony, there's a keyword, from Holocaust survivors. So we might generate, for example, words that mean that. And then lastly, how should I write a search string? So based on finding this information, I might write a series of search strings. Now, as watching this presentation, I'm going to have my folks there do that. So I'm going to show you how that would work. So basically, let me pull this up. I have written some search strings, and I am going to initiate those. So let's see. So here are the search strings I wrote: personal narrative or personal memoir and Holocaust survivor. So notice I've got quotes, I've got different words for this content, and I've got restrictors or expanders. Personal or narrative and Holocaust survivor, personal or memoir and Holocaust survivor and story, personal narrative or personal memoir and Holocaust survivor, and primary source or primary and source. So notice I've pulled these contents. So what I would do I just wrote these, I'm just going to go pop these in a tab, okay? And I'm going to pull content. And I will tell you that before I do any research, I write search strings just like this. And I teach kids how to do that. And then I pull content. See, I'm going to let my search engine do my work. I think we often do the other work. We write questions, and then we make ourselves do the Wade work. No. I'm going to write a series of search strings like this, and then I'm going to make my technology do the work for me. I mean, that's logical, if you think about it, but that's not what we tend to do. That's why it's a powerful tool. So if I look at my content, if you notice, I start pulling content, and these are really specific returns. And again, notice they're not the same as each other. That each one of these content pulls are specific to itself and to what we pulled. And all of them have great things, as you can see, right? So when you write a search string, you get better results. You have a better chance of being right. You find more specific results. And I can't emphasize the power of that enough. So that's step one. And of course, you're going to find good things, but you're not done. I always tell my students, that's step one. Writing good search strings to bring us the first wave. So let's go back and talk about what the next step is. Oh, sorry, crew. Okay. So these were those examples of the search strings that we did, that I just ran for you. And they're just examples. I mean, they're not the best search strings in the world. On any given search, I usually will write 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 search strings, and then I'll just drop them in and see what I pull. And that's the first step. The second step is what I call drill down. And drill down is when you take the content from your first generic search, which we just did, and I use the specific materials I found from that search to write stronger, more specific search strings to bring me even better stuff, right? Because I learned a lot. I mean, if I would spend some time looking at those first search string pulls, I learned content there. So drill down takes us to the next step. So for example, one of the primary sources that first search string found for me was a website called the Shoah Foundation. And the Shoah Foundation focuses on capturing and preserving first-person testimony from Holocaust, people involved in the Holocaust in multiple ways. So knowing that, learning that from my first drill down, my first search, I might write a search string like this. I would first of all use that content, and I would use the domain of the Shoah Foundation website, because I'm going to look right inside that. And I might write a search string like this: site : the domain from the Shoah Foundation. And knowing what else I found from my drill down, I might want to, for example, find testimony from each concentration camp or specific concentration camps if I want that specific detail. So I would say Treblinka and witness and story or testimony. And if I wrote that, I could find really specific content. So drill down is when you take the results of the first search, you use it to write new and even more specific search strings, and you bring your audience even to more specific content. And I will tell you that this is crucial to finding things. You know that the CEO of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, said, when choosing leaders, I tend to choose people who are right the most, or in other words, who tend to be right. How do we teach kids how to find the right materials online? And are we? Because this is what this is about. I've had students who have found, like, they are looking for a particular part, the most minute part that you might ever imagine, and they are able to find that content in seconds. And they're able to find their own answers. If you need to create, or you're finding resources for a brand new version of Blender that hasn't existed and it's new off the gates, how do you find tutorials for that if you don't know how to write a search string? Well, you don't. We need students who are able to facilitate their technology to help them be right and to help them find the right content, the right materials. And that's what writing a search string is about. That's why I'm such an advocate for that. So other information. Let's talk about evaluating that content. And this is going to be a little more generic because I'm running out of time with you, and I understand that. So I teach what I call the 3 C's of verification: checking content, confirming source validity, and comparing your findings to other findings. Requires practice and repetition because kids just don't get it, as we well know. So areas that I teach when I'm checking content: headlines. I also teach kids to read beyond the headline. And I'm going to tell you straight up, when you use the word partisan, they don't know what that means. So your job is to find really good examples. So I'll find partisan viewpoint articles on every side you can imagine. I'll have left, right, center, and I'll show them how it's written, and we'll pick out loaded words so they can understand what partisan means. And then I'll show them a story that's written with as much factual content as possible and show them the difference. And then we practice looking at articles to see which one is partisan, which one is more straight factual, and can they identify that? Folks, we have to practice this with our kids. They just don't see it otherwise, right? And to be honest, either do the adults that we work with. It's just a really important skill set. I teach them, I say, what do you see? Do you see ads and pop-ups in your content? Is there questionable content? I often talk about the emotional connection to what they read. Does it just make your blood boil? Or does it make you agree 100%? Because it's not supposed to do either. It's supposed to just give you information. And can you identify that? Right? Note the details. When the article was written, produced, I make them do that. Can you actually track content? That when I'll have kids use YouTube data viewer so they can tell when it was uploaded. Was it created long before? I also teach kids how to use fact checkers, and I give them an entire plethora of those fact checkers, and we practice using them all. I also have them track and trace that using reverse image. So if there's a story and a picture connected to it, is it a direct connection, or did someone take a picture from someplace else, put it with this thing, and create the story? Question content that does that. I make kids find their content. So teaching them to do that is great, but you as a teacher have to provide the examples and then test them on it. That's the hardest thing. Constantly, this has to be updated and done. So every year, we flip our digital curriculum content. I do it every year too. And some of the stuff can't be done until right before I teach it because I need it to be relevant. So it's work, I'll tell you straight up. But very important work, as we all know. So the second thing is I talk about confirming source validity. So part of confirming source validity is helping students understand what journalistic responsibility is and how that accountability is different than if you are someone, for example, who just has a blog that expresses personal opinion without necessarily the tie to valid sources. And that, again, requires that you spend some time finding examples and then pointing out how you made decisions and helping students make those same repeated decision-making behaviors to determine those things. I also think that students struggle with seeing if something is satirical or funny, even if it often tells them right up front. Our kids are not always the best readers as they should be. So helping them research that, checking the backlinks to see what it's linked to, that helps a great deal. And is the site partisan in viewpoint? Again, that idea of something being partisan is rather a foreign entity for many students. And so I will show them examples of the same story told or shared on different platforms, and we will compare how it was told. And then we'll take the straight news story right down the middle and talk about how that is informational as much as it can be informational. So things that we take a look at are, of course, examples of any kind of partisan production, such as Upworthy, Huffington Post, InfoWars, Breitbart. We look at all of that. I will tell you as a great resource. MediaWise puts out some great products with confirming source validity. It's hosted by John Green, the author. it's really solid. So, I mean, if you're looking for help with this, I would highly recommend that. And also Media Bias Fact Check. Media Bias will literally talk about left-leaning and right-leaning production of media and news, and it's really helpful showing students that information as well. So number 2 is confirming source validity. And again, if you notice there's multiple steps, all of these have to be shared and taught to students. Last area is comparing your findings. Because when you compare what you find in one story to how it's viewed in other news platforms, you can learn a lot. Again, I talk a lot about reputable sources, and that's a difficulty because we live in a world where many times reputable sources have been labeled or called fake news, and so there's a lot of skepticism. So you have to prove the proof is in the pudding. So I will walk through and show all of that. You're still not going to convince everybody, but at least I can show why something is considered reputable at large versus within a group. I also talk about sources being validated. And we talk a lot about databases, primary sources, where content comes from, research, scientific scientific publications. Yeah, it's you've got to talk hardcore validation there. I mean, it's the library's dream, so don't be afraid to involve your librarian in helping you teach this. I also say be well informed and read, read, read. Don't trust the first thing you see. And realize that just because a friend shared it to you doesn't mean that it's true, or that if it doesn't have a strong emotional connection to you, that it's true. It is your job as a citizen, as a digital citizen, to make sure that the content you're reading, the content you're sharing is true material. And that's the challenge, of course. We may not be able to curb the tide in all of the adult lack of verification we see happening in the world around us, but it is our job to prepare the students of tomorrow for that. And it's who else is going to do it if we don't? So getting on board with this concept is really important. So I actually have a great resource down here, Journalism Brams, where you can find real facts from Forbes. This is a great article to help you talk about real facts rather than alternative facts. So in conclusion, as we prepare our students for that digital world, it is our job to create students for a 21st century, our 21st century, I mean, that's our job, to prepare them for that. So I, again, would challenge, if it is so important for our students to function in a digital world, why aren't we teaching internet navigation and confirmation and validity? Because our students spend so much time there. So I welcome you to check out sources. I'm going to provide those. I'm going to drop those again in areas that you can look for. These were actually my references today. And if you notice also, I have on my second source, I produce Nerd Digital Brew, which is a YouTube channel where I teach kids how to write search strings. It's out there, as well as some of the things I referred to. And lastly, if you're looking to develop further information, here are great resources to help you with that. Sorry about my phone ringing. I'm just as bad as my students, aren't I? So this will wrap up our presentation. Please feel free to contact me. I'm Laurie Denk. I teach at Smoky Valley High School. My email is ldink@smokyvalley.org. Please feel free to reach out to me for questions and concerns, other items that you might wish to talk to me about. Thank you again for attending, and I wish you the best of luck in creating the digital learners of tomorrow.